Caretaker Convention, that is. See, so these are rules that generally apply to the public service and to the Premier and to Cabinet, which say they should step back from most of their day-to-day duties and really only engage in things that are emergencies, that they should allow the government effectively to pause and even the playing field during a campaign period for all of the parties. And the fear really is that the platform of the Premier and Cabinet gives them an advantage in the eyes of the public, that they can use that platform to campaign, to bolster their credibility, and to look, I guess, more credible in the eyes of voters, and that gives them a bit of an edge. So that is what his critics are pointing to right now, and the Premier is saying, no, this is an emergency and I have to remain in this role.
And Sean, I know that you also spoke with a public policy expert as well in relation to all of this. So what did that expert say?
So I spoke with Zach Spicer, who is a public policy professor at York University. He says this is a gray area, that, you know, what the Premier is saying, there is some, he has a point in that, you know, in traditional experiences where there's been an emergency, the Premier would be expected to attend to those duties, but that the political nature of this election call and how the Premier has linked that really complicates things. It puts things in a new light and, you know, really into a gray area here. Let's listen to Zach Spicer talk about this issue and what might be a potential solution here.
I think the opposition probably wouldn't have much of a problem if the Premier, you know, very quietly stepped off the campaign trail for a couple of days, headed south, met with the people who he's intended to meet with, tried his best to advance Ontario's agenda, then very quietly returned. Their concern, I think, is, you know, photos of the Premier shaking the president's hand or appearing next to the Secretary of State or holding a press conference and, you know, sounding very Premier-ish, I guess.
So Chris, right there, you see that's the conflict here, that the opposition parties fear that the Premier will use these two trips as a platform. He'll take photos, he'll be on social media, he'll use the material that's generated there in terms of video footage, photos, to bolster his campaign. And it'll fit with this theme that he is now already talking about, this Protect Ontario theme, framing the vote ahead as one about leadership and not about other issues that the opposition want to talk about. So they are not happy about this. The Liberal Party specifically has said that the Premier should resign his spot as the head of the Council of the Federation temporarily while the campaign is going on, and he should cancel those trips to Washington just to ensure that that level playing field exists, that the Caretaker Convention is respected. Now, there aren't really, it seems, a lot of teeth to enforce it. This is a tradition. There are a lot of notices that go out to the civil service and to Cabinet, but it doesn't seem that there are much by way of penalties other than, say, you know, the bully pulpit and opposition pointing out that, you know, this is a problem.
And Sean, the four main party leaders are all set to speak right around now. We're waiting to take the audience back to them as soon as they begin. But in the meantime, I'm also curious, you know that you're certainly expecting to hear about the tariffs during this campaign. What else are you expecting?
You know, the opposition parties are going to try to shift the narrative here, Chris. You know, absolutely the Premier wants to talk about Trump and tariffs. They say, no, we want to talk about the Premier's record over the next 28 days. We want to talk about healthcare, education, you know, homelessness, municipal funding, other issues that they say he has failed on over the last 6.5 years as Premier. And they want to try to really make it a referendum about Doug Ford's record and his time in office, and not necessarily what he wants to talk about, which is Trump, tariffs, and this leadership question. So we'll have to see. You know, this is the push and pull we are going to see develop over the next number of weeks. It's certainly the dynamic to watch right now.
All right, Sean, thank you very much. Sean Jeffords reporting from Queen's Park, and I want to take you now to Windsor, where PC leader Doug Ford is officially launching his campaign. Let's listen together.
I want to welcome my Ontario PC candidates. Andrew Dowie, your PC candidate for Windsor-Tecumseh. They're all champs, these guys. Anthony Liardi, your PC candidate for Essex. And Tony Francis, your PC candidate for Windsor West. And I can't wait to welcome Tony to Queen's Park as part of our Ontario PC team. Yesterday, I met with Her Honor, the Lieutenant Governor, who accepted my request to dissolve the legislature and call an election to be held on February 27th. I couldn't imagine a better place to start our campaign than right here in Windsor. And I couldn't imagine a better partner to start our campaign with than with the people of Windsor. And Mayor Dilkins wanted to be here today, but unfortunately he had a little family emergency, and we all know family comes first. So I just wish you all the best, Mayor, and I'll be coming back here again. But he's an absolute champion for this city and for his people, and I thank him for his support. In these uncertain times, I'm asking the people of Ontario for their trust. I'm asking the people for a strong, stable, 4-year mandate to do whatever it takes to protect Ontario. The people of our province, like people across Canada, are facing unprecedented challenge. President Trump is threatening steep and sweeping tariffs that will devastate Canada's economy on February 1st. And I mean it when I say devastate. Hundreds of thousands of Ontario jobs are at risk, and not just factory workers, service workers, the great construction workers here, everyday hard-working people in offices and factories across Ontario. When workers lose their jobs, entire communities feel pain. Bills go unpaid, local businesses lose customers, families worry about their future. And let's be clear, this isn't just about tariffs. The president has threatened economic force. He's even floated the unthinkable, taking over Canadian territory. Let me say this loud and clear, Canada is not for sale. Not to President Trump, not to anyone. The sad fact is, there is no reason for President Trump to be doing this. Canada and the United States are strongest when we work together. Before I entered politics, I ran a business that had employees on both sides of the border. I've seen it firsthand. If you ask thousands of Canadian and American business owners, or the millions of Canadian and American workers that depend on cross-border trade, they will tell you that Canada-U.S. trade is one of the great win-wins in the history of the world. More jobs and bigger paychecks for workers on both sides of the border. More profits for businesses on both sides of the border. Lower prices for consumers on both sides of the border. More revenue for governments on both sides of the border. I wish Canada was not in this position. I wish we were working together to make Canada and the United States the richest, most successful, safest, most secure two countries on the planet. But nobody has ever solved a problem by wishing it away. We have to play the hand we're dealt. To protect Ontario and Canada, we need a strong leadership that is prepared to do whatever lies ahead. Despite the chaos we now see in Ottawa, I made it very clear that our government will rise above politics and partisanship to work with any Prime Minister to keep Ontario and Canada safe. From factory floors to boardrooms, from Main Street, Ontario to American cable news. I've gone and will continue to go anywhere and everywhere to make the case for Ontario, for Canada, and for America to work together once again. I continue to hope that cooler heads will prevail, that the Trump administration will pull back from these tariffs. But I'm also a realist. We have to prepare for the worst. We're entertaining a period of unprecedented economic risk and lengthy negotiations against President Trump and with the federal government and other provinces. During this time, the government will need to move fast. Responding to the challenge will demand enormous action that was never considered as part of our current mandate. We'll redouble our efforts to build Ontario's economy. We will do whatever it takes to protect workers and their livelihoods. We will invest tens of billions of dollars in new spending to keep people working. We will work with unions and businesses to retain and reskill our hardest hit workers. And as we do, we need to do everything possible to keep our economy competitive. We'll keep up the fight against the job-killing Liberal carbon tax, and we're urging the federal government to join us in cutting red tape and streamlining approvals to get big things built faster. All of this will require unplanned action with long-term consequences, which is why the people of Ontario deserve to have their voices heard. As taxpayers, this is your money. This is your province and your future. You deserve a say. As Premier, my mandate can only come from the people, not from other politicians. And the bigger the mandate I receive from you, the better we'll be able to protect our province. Because this is a game to the president. He seeks to divide and conquer, whether he imposes tariffs next week, next month, or waits another year or more. Trump's threats are not going away. At a time when the federal government has left Canada drifting, exposed, and vulnerable, President Trump will use every day he's in office to exploit any weakness he can find. To protect Ontario, we need a mandate that will outlive and outlast the Trump administration. While I cannot control Ottawa, there will be no weakness in Ontario. These were the facts that weighed on me when I considered calling this election. With the trust and the support of Ontario workers, I will give this fight everything I've got. In times of trouble, Team Ontario will once again answer the call. We'll continue to make the case to our American allies that we're so much stronger together. We'll also be ready to do whatever is necessary to stand up for and protect Ontario. Our workers, businesses, communities, make no mistake, Ontario won't start a fight with the U.S., but you better believe we'll be ready to win one. To the people of Ontario, let me close by saying this. You know me and the kind of leader I am. You may not always agree with me, and that's okay, but my record is clear. When times are tough, I will do whatever it takes to keep you safe. I will work with anyone, and I will stand up to anyone in order to protect our province and our people. I'm prepared to do whatever is necessary and whatever it takes to protect our jobs, businesses, families, and communities. That's why on February 27th, I'm asking for your vote. I'm asking you for a stronger mandate by electing your local Ontario PC candidates. The stronger the mandate, the better. And together, we will protect Ontario. Thank you, and may God bless the people of Ontario. Thank you so much. Thanks, guys. Thank you.
We will now open the floor for questions from the media. Please come to the mic and state your name and outlet. Just a reminder, it's one question and one follow-up. First question.
Thank you, Grace. Mark McAllister from City News.
Hi, Mark.
You have spent tens of millions of dollars in government money at this point. You've made multiple American media appearances, and yet you haven't yet taken these tariffs off the table at this point. What makes voters believe that you can protect Ontario if you haven't at this point?
Well, these tariffs are coming. They haven't come yet, Mark, and thank you for that question. I think I've proven to the people in Ontario I'll do whatever it takes to protect them, to protect the workers, to protect communities, protect businesses. And that's exactly what we're going to do. It may take tens of billions of dollars to do that. That's exactly what I'm going to do. And we'll fight these tariffs with every tool in our toolbox.
This border behind you, this
PC
bridge
leader
behind
Doug
you
Ford
is
speaking
federal
there in Windsor as he officially launches his campaign, making it very clear why he chose to call this early election as he stands there with Detroit in the backdrop and standing in front of that Protect Ontario sign there. Obviously, he has said multiple times that he is going to make this election about those threatened tariffs from the United States. We'll continue to watch the questions here in our newsroom. We'll bring you the latest as soon as we get it, and we're we're also watching for the other leaders as well. While we continue to wait for them, I want to bring in our senior reporter at Queen's Park, Mike Crawley. Mike, we just watched together Ford there speaking. Obviously, he's been clear about why he wanted to call this campaign, but what stuck out to you from what we just heard from Doug Ford?
Yeah, Chris, a couple things. Not just what we heard, but also what we saw. In particular, that backdrop of workers. You know, this is a continuation of a theme that Doug Ford's PCs very successfully exploited in the last election campaign. I'm told that there were representatives from 5 different unions, including the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, the Iron Workers, LIUNA, all there providing that backdrop around sort of reinforcing that message of I'm going to protect Ontario, but in particular, I'm going to protect workers. So that's one thing that I noticed. And of course, the big symbolism of the Ambassador Bridge and behind Doug Ford. You know, it was a very one-note statement that he made. It was all about tariffs, all about protect Ontario. Did you hear anything about healthcare? Did you hear anything about education? Did you hear anything about transportation? It's very clear that this is the theme that Doug Ford is going to want to hammer away at. It's quite possible we'll hear stuff about those other issues, but you know, I do think that that's a thing that the opposition is going to try to exploit, is to say, is Doug Ford in his single-minded focus on tariffs ignoring potentially some of the other issues that actually matter to Ontario voters in a provincial election?
So as we wait to hear from the NDP leader, Marit Stiles, launching her campaign in Toronto, and the other leaders as well, what are you expecting to hear from them today?
Yeah, so definitely from the NDP, you know, we're going to hear a message about how they are fighting for people. I'm not allowed to say what the slogan is going to be, but you're going to get that message from the NDP that it's about you, the voter. You know, Bonnie Crombie and the Liberals, they're putting forward some sort of very issue-oriented proposals. So they've got some proposals about healthcare around getting people family doctors, or stuff related to taxes. So I think you're going to see the opposition parties really try to pivot off of what the PCs are doing and present some other things that are beyond what they would do about tariffs. I do get a sense that the opposition parties are very much also wanting to put forward proposals that would, you know, protect Ontarians from the threat of tariffs. So we'll have to wait and see what those actual details are.
Now, PC leader Doug Ford obviously is well known right across the province, as he's been premier now, re-elected as well in 2022. Mike Schreiner of the Greens, he was in that debate for the first time in 2022, so he also has a pretty good profile here across the province. But when it comes to the Liberal leader and the NDP leader, they're both kind of untested when it comes to province-wide elections. Neither of them have been in debates, for example, with Doug Ford. So what are those two leaders going to have to do here in this campaign to try to rise above and get their profile out to the province?
Yeah, so they're starting from a bit of a disadvantage, right? People who pay only casual attention to politics really don't know a lot about opposition leaders in between elections. You know, this does put a spotlight on them, and it will be a big test for them. How do they perform in the spotlight of an election campaign, in something like a debate? But also, you're going to see an increase in advertising. This is, again, another thing that the opposition parties have been at a disadvantage in comparison to the PCs. PCs are flush with money. They've been spending, you know, you've been seeing the ads of Doug Ford out there. And so we're going to start seeing more ads from the NDP and the Liberals. But it's a question of whether they're so far behind now in terms of getting people's attention that what it's going to take to do over the course of the next 4 weeks, you know, they got their work cut out for them.
All right, Mike, stand by. We're going to get back to your analysis in just a second. But in the meantime, I want to take everybody to Marit Stiles announcing the launch of her campaign in Toronto. Let's listen in.
Time for a change in Ontario. Earlier today, Doug Ford called a snap election nearly 2 years early. He says it's because he wants us to hire him to be our negotiator with Trump. Doug Ford?
Our negotiator? Is he kidding? I mean, just look at Doug Ford's track record. over and over, he makes bad deals for Ontarians. I mean, just one example, right? Ontario Place. Doug Ford got taken to the cleaners by a foreign corporation, and thanks to Doug Ford's negotiating skills, you, me, my family, and each and every household in Ontario are going to massively subsidize a mega spa on the Toronto waterfront for 99 years. $2.2 billion in a luxury giveaway. And I gotta tell you, whether you live in Windsor or Timmins or Thunder Bay or Ottawa, he is taking $400 from each of you to build his spa in downtown Toronto. On this and on so much else, time and time again, Doug Ford has shown he can't negotiate his way out of a paper bag. Is he the guy for the job? No. Doug Ford standing up to Trump? No. I say hell no. Today, Today, Doug Ford, he quit his job as premier. So I'm here to apply for that job. Negotiated with multinational American corporations, protecting jobs, supporting Canadian industry, and also winning higher wages and benefits for workers. I am ready to lead that fight for every person in this province. Another thing that you should know about me is this. What brought me to Ontario from Newfoundland, gosh, more than 30 years ago, was Ontario's promise. A promise of opportunity, good schools for our kids, a family doctor, an affordable life. But that's not today's Ontario. People are leaving our province. They are forced out of their communities that they grew up in. Young people are losing hope. I see it every day. Seniors in our province are ending up homeless. It is tough out there. But here's the thing. Doug Ford has done one favor for the people of Ontario. He has given us a chance to replace him with something better. This year, your vote carries real power. You can vote to protect working families against the threat of tariffs. You can vote to hire more doctors. You can vote to build more homes. You can vote to fix our schools. You can vote to make life more affordable. I know that you don't buy what Doug Ford is selling, trying to convince you that he's something that he's not. After 7 years, long, difficult years, for so many people, it's time to turn the page on Doug Ford. 7 years of neglecting our schools and our hospitals. 7 years of failure, corruption, and bad deals on housing. Doug Ford does not deserve a third term. But you know what? You deserve a better government. Yeah. Give me your support, and you will get a government that will work for you. Après 7 ans, 7 longues, dures années pour plein de gens, il est temps de tourner la page sur Doug Ford. 7 ans négligeant nos écoles et nos hôpitaux. 7 ans d'échecs.
NDP leader Marit Stiles officially kicking off her campaign in Toronto. As she speaks in French here, we're just going to dip out and get back to senior Queen's Park reporter Mike Crawley, who's been watching this along with me. And Mike, I really kind of picked up on the fact that she was promoting her own negotiating skills while attacking Doug Ford's in the face of the threat of these U.S. tariffs, saying that Doug Ford can't negotiate his way out of a paper bag. Certainly, she seems willing to take the premier on, given this one main issue that he appears to be trying to push. What else stuck out to you from that press conference?
You know, I do think, Chris, we got to point out that whoever ends up as Ontario Premier after this election campaign, they're not going to be sitting across the table from Donald Trump negotiating. I mean, that isn't what a premier does. I even wonder if Donald Trump knows that there's a province called Ontario that has, has a premier in charge of it, given that he calls Canada the 51st state and Prime Minister Trudeau the governor. Anyway, setting that aside, what we heard from Marit Stiles there was very much on the offensive against Doug Ford. You know, she brought up the Ontario Place spa deal as an example of, in her words, Doug Ford not protecting Ontario and allowing a foreign corporation to basically get a sweetheart deal on Ontario Place. And she brought up, we heard her name check Timmins and Thunder Bay, places that are far away from Toronto, where Ontario Place is. And the concern that basically taxpayer dollars are going to fund this foreign spa. Anyway, there was a bit of a combination here of the hammering away at Doug Ford and saying, I'm in it for you. We're here to defend the interests of ordinary Ontario voters. And it's also, last thing I'll mention is that just before we cut out, we heard her speaking a bit of French, which is, a thing that Doug Ford doesn't do. He's been premier for over 6 years. There is a significant Francophone population in Ontario, and Doug Ford had said he was going to learn some French and never actually has.
Now, also, Mike, I want to dig into kind of the regional disparities here, because the different parties do well in different parts of the province. Obviously, the 905 traditionally has been kind of a very key spot for all of the campaigns, a lot of votes up for grabs. What are you watching for specifically when it comes for the 905 and the campaigning that we're expecting there?
Yeah, Chris, I've covered a number of Ontario elections, and we always say that really it's won and lost in the 905. That's partly because of the number of seats that there are, and also because of the tendency of those voters to switch back and forth. So ridings where you do tend to have, constantly voting Tory, like happens in, say, Eastern Ontario, where they constantly vote Liberal in parts of Toronto, certain NDP strongholds as well. So it's we do tend to focus on the seats that shift between elections, and that's one of the things that makes the 905 really important. In particular, I'm going to focus on Mississauga, because Mississauga has been, if you look back over historical elections, the way Mississauga votes tends to be how the province votes. The party that wins the bulk of the seats in Mississauga, or all of the seats in Mississauga, is the one that forms government. And so we've got this interesting situation now where the Liberal leader is from Mississauga and is running in a riding there. And, really, if Bonnie Crombie and the Liberals can't break through in Mississauga and win some seats, they are there's basically no way that they can actually win the election. And it's also key for the NDP to win in the 905. Remember, the PCs won every single seat in the 905 except one in Oshawa. So they won everything in Mississauga, everything in Brampton, everything in York Region, Vaughan, Markham, and also in Durham Region except Oshawa. And so unless the other parties can break into that Fortress 905, it's over.
Okay, Mike, hang tight. I want to take everybody back now to NDP leader Marit Stiles. She's finished showing off that French that Mike was just talking about. And let's listen in again to Marit Stiles.
Conservatives. Life is harder for everyone. Doug Ford doesn't deserve a third term. It's time for new leaders. It's time for new ideas. It's time for a premier who is on your side. Ontario. Make it happen with your vote. I'm asking for your support. Thank you beaucoup. Merci beaucoup. Et miigwech, merci tout le monde. Thank you so much.
Okay, we'll continue to watch the questions that the NDP leader receives from journalists there in that room. Well, I now want to take you to Liberal leader Bonnie Crombie, who is launching her campaign in Barrie today. Let's watch that.
Well, good morning, and thank you for joining us this morning. Bonjour, and thank you, Dr. Rose. We are here today because Doug Ford doesn't care about you, because he's decided to spend $175 million on an early election that we don't need, rather than spending that money on getting you a family doctor, or do anything to make your life a little easier. I have 3 kids who are all young adults, and I see firsthand what their generation is facing. Young people can't find jobs. They can't afford a home. And frankly, they're missing life milestones. None of them have a family doctor. And they wonder if they'll ever be able to start a family. The sad thing is, you know what they hear from their friends? If you want to succeed, you have to leave Ontario. And that really pisses me off. So do I think we should have an election right now? No. But it is our opportunity to change the path that Ontario is on. This is Doug Ford's Ontario, and over the past 7 years, things have just gotten worse. So let's change it. I'm Bonnie Crombie, and I promise to do more for you. Thank you. And Rose and I are happy to take your questions. Okay, Mace. I'm going to start that off if I can, but I'd like Rose to contribute as well, because as the former president of the OMA, I know she's given this a lot of thought. I will say to you, a little late and not enough. Too little, too late. Doug Ford said 7 years ago he would fix hallway medicine. It's only gotten worse. He said he'd end wait times in hospitals. They've only gotten worse. 2.5 million people don't have access to a family doctor. Soon it'll be more than over 3 million who are at risk of losing their doctor as doctors retire. Our plan will create 3,100 doctors in family medicine and team care so that everyone in Ontario will have access to a family doctor. And yes, we will present a plan. It will be costed, and it costs as much as the pre-election checks. Rose, I know you'd like to respond to this as well.
Absolutely. Thanks for asking. I know Dr. Jane Philpott. I have a lot of respect for Dr. Jane Philpott. The fact that in December 2024, the Conservative government decided to hire Dr. Jane Philpott has nothing to do with a strategy for healthcare. Had healthcare been a priority of our current supermajority sitting government, it would have been well established in 2018. I know what it's like to practice family medicine in Ontario. And for years, Ontario's doctors have led this message loud and clear that we need more family doctors, that we need shorter wait times in the emergency department, that we need access to consultants. And that hasn't been prioritized. And so now that Dr. Jane Philpott has been invited to the Conservative team from a Liberal background, shows me that even the Conservatives are asking the Liberals to fix healthcare.
Let me just add something if I can. We're launching our tour here in Barrie because 55,000 people residing in this area don't have access to a family doctor. 55,000. It was just 2 weeks ago. We saw in the town of Walkerton 1,014 people line up in their parkas, some of them seniors with their walkers and in their wheelchairs, hoping hoping they can register for the one new family doctor that was coming into town. There's hopes of a second one coming. The next 500 people could get access to that. Young mothers with their babies in arms, wrapping them up in a snowstorm, waited 6 hours. This is the healthcare situation in Ontario. It's horrible. It's disgusting. It should never have happened. This is Ontario. This is Doug Ford's Ontario. This is what he has created by not being on the job fixing healthcare. Does the mayor of Barrie understand that 55,000 people in his own community don't have access to health care? How does that help the situation? How does that help solve the health care? Do you know how many people are homeless? I went to tour the food bank here in Barrie. They supply food for 7,000 people each and every month. That's the reality in Ontario. Over 2 million people using a food bank. People who can't pay rent, can't buy groceries. They're using food banks. And they've certainly lost the dream of owning a home. Our schools are overcrowded. The mayor is entitled to his own opinion. Let the people decide if this is the kind of Ontario that they want, because they can choose change, and we will do more for them.
Liberal leader Bonnie Crombie launching her campaign in this provincial election up in Barrie. Obviously, you can see that healthcare is the main driver of her campaign, wearing the hat with it printed on it, as well as that sign that said "More doctors for you," and quite a starkly different scene there compared to what we saw with Doug Ford and with NDP leader Marit Stiles. They were both surrounded by lots of candidates and some others who support their parties. Bonnie Crombie there in Barrie just standing beside one candidate, and certainly a different scene from the other leaders. I want to dig into that now with Karim Bardisi, a political scientist here in Toronto. He ran for the Liberals back in 2022, but now is with a nonpartisan policy and leadership think tank at Toronto Metropolitan University. Karim, thank you very much for being with us today.
Morning, Chris.
So I want to start with that signal that Bonnie Crombie is sending there, given the fact that we saw such different scenes in Windsor with Doug Ford and in Toronto with Marit Stiles, surrounded by so many candidates and people. What do you think the signal is here that Bonnie Crombie is inadvertently sending?
I think it's a signal about the kind of message that they think that this campaign is about. You know, the governing party has the chance to say what it thinks the campaign is about. And different parties get to tell that story, and then the public also has a view, and different members of the public have that view. So you have three different parties, I think, here with three very different messages about what they think the campaign is about. You have Premier Ford saying this is about protecting Ontario. You have Marit Stiles taking on directly that message and saying that she can do a better job of that than Premier Ford. And you've got Bonnie Crombie profiling a very well-reputed, very well-respected candidate, Rose Zacharias, and making this really about healthcare.
Now, but given the fact that, you know, Marit Stiles was taking that threat of the tariffs and her negotiating skills head on, will that not hurt the Liberals here, given the fact that the other parties seem to be willing to engage in that storyline, and Bonnie Crombie seems a little off script here on the first day of the campaign?
Yeah, I think, you know, they have their scripts and they're kind of deploying them. So, you know, the Liberals have their placard that says "More doctors for you," NDP on a variety of issues, and the Conservatives, again, on one issue. So it'll be you know, campaigns are about a lot of things. They're about, you know, getting out, getting your organization, getting your resources out. It's about responding to the moment, and it's about getting a message that tries to punch through. So I think they've all got their scripts, and it's really up to the public and members of the public in different regions. I know previously we were talking about the 905 with Mike Crawley. The 905 issues are very different, potentially issue set that you might get in a Timmins or a Tillsonburg or a downtown Toronto. And so I think the parties are trying to figure out or have made their decisions about what their scripts are.
Now, election campaigns are certainly unpredictable. We know that. We can see here, as you're mentioning, that the Liberals are hoping to fight this on health care, and Doug Ford hoping to fight this on those tariffs from the U.S. But are there any other issues that you're watching for that might surprise people, that might eclipse other issues through this campaign?
Yeah, so I know affordability has been discussed a lot, and I think, Ontarians, Canadians maybe are a bit cynical about government's ability to actually do something about those issues. I'll note that Premier Ford didn't even mention the taxpayer-funded checks in his own release speech that are just landing in people's mailboxes now. At Toronto Metropolitan University at the dais, we engage a lot with young people and a lot of young leaders, and I think there's some specific issues around education, post-secondary education, that are not being attended to by the parties, at least in their launch speeches. I think you have the creeping issue of the widespread deployment of technology in ways that are concerning people, and do the parties have a way of resolving that issue, especially technology in schools? And then you have, I think, a bit of a hidden issue that wasn't really raised directly, but you saw a bit in the different campaign launches. I noted that Premier Ford's launch had only men behind him, and the economic side of the economic development of the province relies on men and women, and it also relies on a broad spectrum of people contributing to the economy. And so having people who are not directly affected by tariffs, or people who don't think they're directly affected by tariffs because their sector is not affected by tariffs as directly, I think they're going to want to hear messages about how is their sector contributing, how is the care economy part of the economic future of the province, how is the technology sector part of the economic future of the province. So a few issues there around post-secondary education, technology, and the care sector that weren't attended to as much in those speeches.
Now, the ground game in election campaigns is obviously something that we watch closely during campaigns such as this. This one is kind of a rare one, happening right in the winter time. Of course, that means that it's going to be difficult to get the volunteers out, might be difficult to put signs in lawns, that sort of thing. Definitely throws a bit of a wrench in the gears here. But how much of an impact do you think that winter aspect might have on the ground game and the ability to volunteer and have that campaign across the province?
It's real. I have personally campaigned for myself and for others in the depths of winter, and it's hard to get people out, as you said. It's harder to get around as easily, and a lot of politics in Ontario, even though we have large ridings of 110,000 residents on average, it's still a door-to-door effort, and so the best kinds of campaigns are ones that have a good online effort that complement a good offline effort. And so you might need to resort more to the online campaigning, to digital media ads, because people will be less inclined to open the door. Maybe people will be less inclined to go to events, and it might be a bit harder to get volunteers. But campaigns have to deal with the cards that have been dealt with them, and the winter is one aspect, which we think will maybe depress turnout a bit. But issues can rise that that motivate people to vote. So all the parties are going to be looking for things that get people motivated to come out positively and support their cause.
And it certainly would be depressing if the voter turnout was lower than the historic low that we saw in 2022. But for now, Kareem, thank you very much for joining us on the program. Kareem Bardisi is a political scientist at Toronto Metropolitan University. And we've heard now from the Liberals, the NDP, and the PCs and their leaders. I want to take you now to Green Party leader Mike Schreiner, who is announcing the launch of his campaign in Toronto. Let's watch together.
Normally, the first day of a campaign is a celebratory occasion. People are excited, but not today. With an election call in the face of looming tariff threats. We should be here at Queen's Park working across party lines to show Donald Trump strength through unity. But instead, Doug Ford has called an election, abandoning the people of Ontario when he needs them, when people need him the most. But this should come as no surprise, because over the past 7 years, since the Ford government has taken office, housing starts are down, housing costs are up. 2.5 million Ontarians don't have access to a family doctor. Unprecedented emergency room closures and hallway health care out of control. overcrowded classrooms, and the rich just seem to be getting richer while the rest of us struggle just to get by. Clearly, Doug Ford cares more about protecting his own job than he does about your job or making your life more affordable or better. Ontario Greens have a different vision, a vision where we put people over profits, a vision that will be carried out by a full slate of candidates, local champions in their riding, who will be your advocate at Queen's Park, not the premier or leader's voice in their riding, fighting to build homes that you can afford, fix healthcare and education, and create a fair Ontario by putting people before profits.
All right, and from one mic to the next, we just heard from Green Party leader Mike Schreiner. They're launching the Green campaign, and I want to bring back in senior Queen's Park reporter Mike Crawley, who's been watching all of this with us. Mike, I didn't get your thoughts on either Mike Schreiner or Bonnie Crombie, and I want to go back to Bonnie Crombie in particular because obviously the Green Party is kind of the fourth party here in terms of size, in terms of seat count as well. But the Liberals have certainly been known to have quite a big machinery behind them as well. But when you look at that scene of Bonnie Crombie up in Barrie with just one candidate, and you compare it to what we saw with Doug Ford, surrounded by all of those workers as well as several candidates, and Mart Stiles in a big room with lots of candidates there behind her, what kind of a signal is that sending?
Yeah, Chris, look, election campaigns are visual events. The parties tend to put a lot of thought into how the leaders appear and the backdrop behind them to help reinforce the message. I see what the Liberals were trying to do. Bonnie Crombie was in front of a medical center in Barrie. She's standing beside a candidate who's Dr. Rose Zacharias, a former president of the Ontario Medical Association and a family doctor, trying to go at this healthcare message. But the folks who are going to see this on their supper on social media, you take a look at the scene and you see two people in parkas with the wind blowing and this kind of blank backdrop behind them. Occasionally like a car drove up and behind them and people started getting out. You're like, what's going on here? And it conflicts with the message that Crombie is trying to get across. So it's a bit of a surprising choice for a campaign launch that wants to kind of send a message of we're ready for prime time, we're ready for government, we've got a big machine going on. In terms of the substance of Bonnie Crombie's message, the hat with the real leaders fix healthcare, the poster saying more doctors for you. This is clearly an issue that the Liberals are going to be hammering away at during the campaign. And got to point out, Doug Ford again didn't mention healthcare once in his opening campaign launch. But we'll have to see how well this works for Bonnie Crombie and the Liberals.
Well, and especially when you consider how directly Mart Stiles took on the U.S. tariff threat. She was very clear, promoting her own negotiating skills, saying she is ready to take on this fight. And in fact, Doug Ford is not. So what is the impact when you have kind of this third leader here on a totally different channel than the other two? Could that help her as the other two kind of fight out on the tariff front, or what do you think will be the impact of that?
It's a big question is going to be what messages break through and what message, the delivery of those messages as well. So, you heard quite a lot of energy and enthusiasm from Mart Stiles. She's buoyed by those candidates in the background. So a ton of energy at that event, and Bonnie Crombie seemed to be struggling with her outdoor event and the weather to kind of really nail some of those points that she was getting at. So, look, Karim Bardisi mentioned that the air war, the advertising is going to be important in this campaign because of the fact that it's going on in winter. And so those are some of the messages that are going to be important. The PCs are already out of the gate with an ad. They posted it on social media, 30-second ad, very very much, again, focused on that Protect Ontario theme and on tariffs. So that's an important part, just simply from a strategic standpoint and an impact standpoint over the course of this short 4-week campaign.
Now, when you and I were analyzing the 2022 election campaign, I remember you talking about how the PCs at that time, seeking re-election, were running this kind of front-runner, keep the questions limited. A lot of candidates didn't go to debates, that sort of style of campaigning from the PCs. Are you expecting that kind of campaign again from the PCs this time around?
Yeah, and with a bit of a twist. I mean, this is very much going to be a leader-focused campaign from the PCs. The Progressive Conservatives feel they have a magic bullet in Doug Ford. They feel his appeal to middle-of-the-road voters is quite strong, and so leadership as well as a theme, you're going to hear him when he has the opportunity to, he's going to very much contrast himself to Marit Stiles and Bonnie Crombie, basically trying to say he is the person that needs to be in charge protecting Ontario. As for that question of, the local candidates not showing up to debates, not doing interviews, very limited media avails, I think you're going to see that as well, again, from the local candidates. But Doug Ford himself, he's become a little more confident in dealing with the media, and his handlers around him also feel that he handles questions in this particular format much better than he did. So I think there'll probably be a little bit less of that limiting of Ford's access to the media. However, I don't expect you're going to see him sit down and do an interview with me or David Common on Metro Morning, or possibly any of the other sort of the media outlets that cover Queen's Park on a full-time basis.
Well, that's too bad. I would very much like to see that interview.
I would love to do that, and I'll say again to Doug Ford's media people, my request for an interview that I've been putting forward for the last 6.5 years still stands anytime.
Now, while we await for that response to come back to you, the other big thing of every election campaign, obviously, is the debate. And Doug Ford, we've now seen him tested a couple times over. Mike Schreiner breaking into the debate for the very first time in 2022. And many people thought he performed quite well, especially with a few zingers around nurses and health care. But the other two leaders, the Liberal leader and the NDP leader, we've not seen on the debate stage. What are you expecting in terms of the dynamics of that debate that will be coming?
It's an opportunity for those leaders to present themselves to Ontarians. The thing is, Chris, I've been noticing a trend in recent years in a lot of campaigns at the provincial level and at the national level. Debates aren't moving voters like they used to. And I don't know, is this about the effect of social media? Is it about a certain amount of apathy? Is it that the voters are much more kind of locked into their opinions? That last debate in Ontario in 2022 didn't change what we were seeing in the polling. So I think it's an important event, and we have to cover it, and it is a very much a test of their ability to think on their feet and get across their policy ideas. I will be surprised if it moves votes significantly.
Now, at one point, it certainly looked like the Greenbelt scandal and those other sorts of controversial issues would take center stage in any upcoming provincial election, and that yet now here we are, and certainly there are other issues, possibly the tariffs. Do you think that those scandals may come back and impact the PCs here?
I mean, certainly the Liberals and the NDP and the Greens to some extent are going to try to do that. Doug Ford wants to make this campaign about protecting Ontario, about tariffs. If he's campaigning against anybody, he's campaigning against Donald Trump. The other parties are going to try to chip away at Ford's armor, and I think their ability to get issues like what went on with the Greenbelt, to get that lack of access to family doctors, housing, to hold Doug Ford accountable for that promise he made in 2022, we're going to build 1.5 million homes over the course of the next 10 years. Okay, we're only 2.5 years into the mandate, but they are nowhere close to hitting that target. So, I think Doug Ford's record is certainly on, it's on the agenda. It's got to be on the agenda here in this campaign. What I'm not certain about is to what extent that will actually resonate with the voters. Like if you ask people about their feelings around Ford's performance, a lot of voters give him credit for backing away from the Greenbelt thing, even though he never said he was going to open up the Greenbelt to housing development in the previous campaign, and then went ahead to go and do it, and it took nearly a year for them to reverse that. What we saw in the publicly available polling was that after he reversed course, support for the PCs went back up. So, we all thought in 2022 that COVID was going to be a big thing in the campaign, and it turned out not to be. The provincial response to COVID, with all those deaths in the the long-term care homes, the back and forth on lockdowns and everything, it ended up not being an issue in 2022. So, is the Greenbelt going to be an issue in this one? Hard to say. As hard as the opposition parties are going to try to make it, I'm not sure that it's necessarily there. Except for people who are already know they're not going to vote for Doug Ford. They care about that issue. It's getting those voters who voted for Ford in 2022 to come back, to come over to the opposition. What is it going to take to get those folks to change their minds?
Well, and getting anybody to get out to the polls is something that provincial parties struggle with. We saw in 2022 historically low voter turnout of 43.5%. If that were to repeat, Mike, just quickly here as we are set to wrap, who would benefit the most from a very low voter turnout?
The incumbents, for sure, the PCs. And look, add in, the middle of the winter, add in the fact that this election was kind of unexpected, you could see record low turnout in this campaign.
All right, Mike Crawley for us, our senior reporter at Queen's Park. Mike, thank you very much. And you can stay caught up on the provincial campaign anytime by heading directly to the election section of our website. That's at cbc.ca/Ontario Votes 2025. And we will have extensive coverage over the next 28 days. Hope you follow along with us. But for now, you're watching CBC News Toronto. I'm Chris Glover. We'll have more stories from our city when we come back.